Hi. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Excuse me for the coughing. I'm sick. But I had to do this video because, as you know, I'm a target individual. And whenever these idiots, or psychopath, as I like to call them, start the heavy, heavy handed psychological operations using coercive mind control tactics, I gotta expose them. I got to say what I have to say. Okay? Now, recently in the news, we've all heard about what happened in Florida with the killing of 9 people by Esteban Santiago, who claimed that he was being mind controlled. And in fact, he called the FBI. Let's see. He called the FBI, as it says here. Official says he reached out to the FBI in November and told them that the Islamic State has taken control of his mind. Okay? And they did nothing. They didn't interview him to see what was happening. They didn't try to give him help. Now, why do you think that is? And that is a very telling tale. Because if you're a TI, you know, for those of us who went to law enforcement and asked them for help in what was being done to us, they just brush us off. They said, go seek professional help. Or they put you in the back of a car and take you to the psych ward for evaluation. Now, if you look throughout history in the world, not just in the United States, but the use of psychiatry to silence, to quell dissidents, to quell behavior that the state deem as a threat, whether it's a threat or not, they use psychiatry to silence you or to discredit you. And the fact that they don't offer any help, they don't want to investigate our claims of being harassed, of being stalked, of our privacy being invaded, our properties being stolen and damaged. You know, it's a telling tale. Because the government has done a masterful job, okay, of discrediting TIs. And they use every resources available. They use journalists, they use psychiatrists and psychologists to discredit TIs. Every newspaper article that has been written by so-called credible news agencies, the Washington Post, the New York Times, have all painted a picture of TIs being crazy or have a mental illness. Right? Every article. The most recent was last year, the New York Times article, and it was an article on targeted individuals. And what they made us look like? We're a bunch of crazy people. Okay? So, let's examine this. There are a lot of people who are conditioned into believing that the United States do not and does not engage in non-consensual illegal experimentation. Excuse me. Regardless of the history of those in certain agencies in our government that have facilitated, created, and participate in non-consensual human experimentation. Okay? And not just the government, but hospitals are involved, psychiatrists are involved, chemists are involved. So they have always been a history. And also there's always have been paper trails that led to the discovery of non-consensual human experimentation. So why, when we as TIs talk about what's being done, we're automatically labeled? Instead of just saying, hey, you know what? Let's examine what's happening to you. Let's sit down, let's talk about it, let's research it, and let's see what conclusion we can come up with. But it is automatic that when you go to try and get help, the first thing they do is to brush you aside and label you as mentally ill. You know, they've used this on whistleblowers, on political adversaries, on people who were simply trying to stop the brutal and violent murders of their own people. They're being labeled as mentally ill. Slaves who ran away from their slave masters were labeled as having a mental illness. And the good slave who do everything their master wanted was called sane. Imagine that. Okay? So I believe that this guy was mind controlled, not by ISIS, but by his own government, in which he served this country as a soldier, putting his life at risk. And there's also been a history of the Defense Department experimenting on soldiers. You know, they want the public to believe that there's no such thing as mind control. But they've spent billions of dollars developing weapons for the purpose of mind control. Okay? Google silent sound. Okay? What is known as, let me get the proper term, is silent sound spread spectrum, or SSSS. The use of subliminal messenger, whether visual or verbal. The use of neurolinguistic programming in a negative way, also known as dark NLP. Okay? And the use of law enforcement to surveil, to spread rumors, to slander the names of individuals who they deem as a threat. So when I hear Ti is talking about, this is private corporation. This is not private corporation. Private corporation don't have the ability to come into your neighborhood to spread negative slander campaign against you and have your neighbors and those outside your community participate. It is the government. It is those in law enforcement. It is members of religious organization, of religious belief system, who have been given a cause, their so-called righteous cause, okay, or the use of the Department of Health to label you a public danger. That is what's happening. But it is all deception to cover the non-consensual, illegal human experimentation, the illegal microchipping for the purpose of remote neural monitoring. Okay? They have always been human guinea pigs in this country's history for the advancement of medical science, technology, and psychological development of psyops, psychological operations. Make no mistakes about it. As TIs, once you are aware of your targeting, that is the end of your life as you know it. You will be surveilled 24/7. Your home will be broken into. Your property will be damaged. Law enforcement is going to harass you with noise campaign, with a psychological subliminal system to try to communicate with you, not through verbal, but through visualized means. Okay? But through virtual, I mean, visual mean. And so you have to be aware of this. And for those TIs who have committed act of violence, listen, I'm not going to condemn you, but I'm not going to support you in that, because, again, I do things a little different. Maybe if I didn't have kids, I probably would have taken the violent route. Maybe, I don't know. But I know I'm not the type of person who would take something like this lying down. Okay? And so I choose this method as a way of fighting back, as a way of exposing what is being done. Okay? So the use of coercive mind control tactics is a big part and is a staple to their psychological conditioning. And I've did shows on this, and I have to continue to come back to it because this is one of the psychological method that they use to condition you. Okay? And not, when I say condition, is not in a positive way, but in a negative way. Okay? How they're conditioning your mind to what they're telling the perps out there is two different things. And it's always deception. Always deception. Okay? And as it says here, that this is a deceptive type of conditioning. Okay? But once people start to participate in it, they're never going to stop. Because they have to keep up the label that you're given, one of mental illness, to make them feel that they've gotten away with a crime against you. Okay? It is conspiracy of your rights. It is the destruction of your financial, psychological, social surrounding and life that is taking place. It is the taking away of your ability to think, to reason, to conduct yourself in a positive way that is being taken away. Okay? And so I'm going to read this again for those new who may not have listened or watched past videos on my past shows. But let's get into coercive psychological system. And they are behavioral change program which use psychological force in a coercive way to cause the learning and adaptation of ideology, a designated set of belief, ideas, attitudes, or behavior. Okay? So the strategy used by the operators is to systematically select, sequence, and coordinate many different types of coercive influence, anxiety, and self-producing stress over a continuous period of time. So I talk about noise campaign that I get from the law enforcement, those in the paramedics, and those in the community with the use of their vehicle alarms. And usually it may be one of the two, but most of the time it is all three. Police sirens, ambulances, often getting one more, fire trucks. So it's four, right? So usually it's one or two of the four, and sometimes it's all at the same time. All right? And this is a regular occurrence. Now, they may ease off when they realize that they've gone too far with it. So you wouldn't hear any noise, no alarms, no sirens, nothing for maybe a day or two. But then they're right back at it. And that is to try to take away the attention from the noise campaign that they're doing. Okay? So, and again, is to produce anxiety and stress. Okay? So, you know, as it says here, right? So in such a program, the subject is forced to adapt in a series of tiny invisible steps. So you don't even know that you're being conditioned. You're being conditioned before you even realize that. And if you realize it, you know, it's such a shock to your mind that it causes a lot of stress and a lot of anxieties, and you can have a breakdown. Okay? And so, again, this is what's being done. All right? So it says the subject of these tactics do not become aware of the hidden organizational purpose of the coercive psychological program until much later, or, you know, let's say if ever. So you may never become aware, and your behavior could be changed without you even knowing it. And believe me, once you become a victim of this, the behavior in which they're trying to instill and condition you to is always negative. Always negative. Okay? Now, what it says here about the tactics being applied in group setting is not necessarily the case. Okay? But I think if you're living with family, then yeah, it is applied in the group setting. It says by well intended, but deceive friends and allies. Deceive. The key word here is deceive, deception. Okay? And it says this keep the victim from putting up the ego defense. Right? So the coercive psychological influence of these programs aim to overcome the individual's critical thinking ability and free will. Apart from any appeal to informed judgment, so your judgment is screwed, victims gradually lose their ability to make independent decisions and exercise informed consent. So imagine them using this to make you consent to them experimenting on you, right? Or trying to blackmail you, trying to extort money from you, okay, for a crime that they perpetrated on you. Okay? So, as it says their critical thinking, defensive, cognitive process, values, attitudes, ideas, conduct, and ability to reason are undermined by a technological process rather than by a meaningful free choice. So the decision you make while you're a targeted individual, okay, is probably one that you would normally make, because all the decisions that you'll make as a TI, okay, is meant to be destructive, to destroy your life, to degrade your ability to make rational choices and to have a positive thinking mind. And then it goes on to talk about the tactics. And if you read the tactics, you will see exactly how they do it and understand. And therefore, you can fight back against a lot of the psychological conditioning. There may be nothing you can do in terms of, some of the uncontrollable things that may happen in your life. But, that's if you're married and they're trying to manipulate your wife or husband into leaving you, and they'll do this by firing you from your job. You can't find work. So therefore your partner, the stress of having to be the sole provider, particularly if you're not making a lot of money, is hard. Or if you're single, you will never be able to find someone to share your life with. Okay? Your social status is degraded until you have none. You're at the lower end of the totem pole. And if you do find a job, it's always low paying. Even though you have the skills and knowledge to get a higher paying job, the only type of job that would be offered to you are low paying jobs. Okay, and the reason why this is done is to keep you from building any kind of financial resource to fight back, to hire people, to buy equipment, to record, the harassment. Because I'm going to tell you, every electronics that I have bought to expose this, from cameras to recorders, have all been destroyed. My cell phone, which I was able to plug into my computer using the USB cable, I can no longer do that. My micro SD card that I have in my phone will always go bad, and I have to buy a new SD card. So that means that the videos that I have on the card, I can't get. I can't get to it because they've destroyed it. So everything that these people do is to destroy your life. Okay? And to try and silence you. So I'm, like I said, I'm not gonna read the whole the tactics and stuff like that. You guys can read that yourself. But let me just read this, okay? And I want TIs to understand this. All right? So it says, by confusing, intimidating, and silencing their victim, those who profit from these systems evade exposure and prosecution for actions recognized as harmful and which are illegal in most countries, such as fraud, false imprisonment. You know, that's a theme that they use on me on a daily basis of being arrested. And undue influence, involuntary servitude, which they've tried while I was working. When it came to payday, they will always try to make me feel like I wasn't going to get paid and I should be working for free and not say anything. Okay? Intentional infliction of emotional distress, outrageous conduct, and other torturous acts. So remember, you're being tortured. You're being psychologically tortured. You've been physically tortured with the use of directed energy weapons such as microwave and chemical spraying. And so you're a victim. So when I hear some TIs say don't be a victim. I have to say this. Would you tell somebody who was raped not to be a victim? Would you tell someone who got shot, don't be a victim? They're already victims. Okay? An act have been committed on their persons. That's why they are victims. So beware of when you hear other TIs say don't be a victim. Okay? What they're trying to do is to get you to ignore the fact of what has been done, that you are a victim of torture, that you are a victim of a psychological manipulation, that you are a victim of non-consensual human experimentation. Okay? So, and then also you're being stalked. And the way how they get around stalking you is that they never use the same person. It's always somebody new. Right? So for instance, yesterday I'm walking my son back from school and we get on the block and there's this guy standing in the middle of the block. Just standing there. He sees me, takes his phone out of his pocket, looks at it, put it back in his pocket. He looks at his watch and he crosses the street. And as he's crossing the street, he keeps looking back at me. Multiple times. Okay? Never seen him before. So I decided, I was like, you know what? I want to see who this guy looked like. So I walked in front of him, turned around, looked at him. And as he walked past me, he takes out his phone again, look at it, and I'm looking at him, and his phone was blank. He didn't turn it on, nothing like that. All right? So them looking at their phone is a signal of some sort, or a message of some sort. That's why they continue to do that. Okay? And then again this morning, taking my son to school again, perp at the corner, sees me, takes his phone out, put it back in his pocket, walked towards me, and as he got close to me, he gives me a hand signal. And then, walking him to school, the look on the faces of the people who are walking towards me, as a TI, you know that something is going on. You know that. And particularly when they start doing this to you. that is a sign for silence. Or they'll do this. That is a sign for silence. Right? Because they're trying to silence you. Silence you. Right? And that has always been the government job. Whenever anyone who is trying to expose their wrongdoing is to try to incarcerate you. Okay? And how do they do that? By excuse me, by setting you up, trying to use that as a method of leverage for your silence. But I understand this all too well, and you're never going to shut me up. So as like I said before, whatever you feel you have, let's go to court. Let's go to court. But that's not happening. And the reason why is because there's a conspiracy against me, and there's a conspiracy against every other TI, and that is to deny us of our rights. Okay? Deny us of our rights. Because we are victims of non-consensual human experimentation. I myself have been microchipped for the purpose of remote neural monitoring. They monitor my thoughts. If I'm thinking something, there'll be a short burst of a police siren. And when it happens multiple times during the day, you know, and it's like a very short, maybe 1 or 2 seconds, that's it. You know, so if I wake up in the middle of the night, I get 1 or 2 seconds of the short burst of the police sirens. If I'm walking on the street, there's a police car that's approaching, they will turn on their lights, or they'll turn on the lights and the sirens. So tell me again, for those TIs who believe this is private corporation, do private corporation have this much influence that they can get the police to surveil you? Can they? I think that's a question you need to be asking yourself. So before you start believing in false narrative, you have to understand that is exactly what they want you to believe. Because it takes the blame from saying, okay, well, this is our government that's doing this. This is maybe the CIA, this may be law enforcement. You know, so they feel that they're off the hook. Because you're not blaming them, and they're the ones that are doing it. They're the ones that are giving information to the perps out there, to your neighbors. They're the ones that are knocking on their door. So whether they be from the police department, the Department of Health, the EPA, or whichever government agencies that have the ability to pull those departments together, okay, they're not private entities. You have to understand that. So when like I said, when I'm being harassed by the police, you know, the police don't work for private agencies. They work for the government. They may have some officers who may work for private agencies, you know, but I think if that was the case, you would have more police officers coming out and speaking out about what's being done. But the fact that there isn't, you know, because no one wants to go up against the government. They will destroy your life and your family's life and your children's life. They will do that. And that's a big reason of why people remain silent. Okay? So, you know, like I said, and you have to understand the false narrative. Even the ones that they want you to believe. Like for me, it's like they always try to use the false narrative of an investigation. That's the reason why the police are being used. Okay, that's the reason why people in the neighborhood are participating in, you know, the psychological harassment, the psychological torture. You know, but I'm only speaking for myself. Okay? If you feel different, you have every right to explain yourself and what you believe is happening. But this is just my belief. Okay. And remember, if you're a TI and you're watching these videos, resist the urge to act out in a violent manner, because that's what they want. Okay, the minute you do that, and they would allow you to do that, okay, because they want to set an agenda. They want to set an agenda to keep this program going, even though it is a deceptive program, but to keep it going so they can continue on with the deception. You got to remember that. Okay, what you have to do, you have to study. Excuse me. Study psychological conditionings and study psychological methods, particularly coercive persuasion programming, dark NLP. There's a great book by Dante Lyon Jones called Mind Control Language Pattern. You can Google it and you can read it for free online. Okay, that's a very good book to help you understand the negative psychological conditioning that has been done to your mind.